The fluorescent lights of the conference room hummed with an artificial coldness that matched the atmosphere perfectly. 87 employees sat in uncomfortable chairs, their faces illuminated by the glow of laptop screens and smartphones, waiting for another one of Daniel Johnson's theatrical presentations. Rebecca Miller stood in the back corner, her hands gripping the handle of her cleaning cart, trying to make herself smaller, more invisible. At 43, she had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight, a survival skill she'd acquired over 2 years of pushing mops and emptying trash cans in a building where she was less than furniture. Daniel Johnson strode to the front of the room like a peacock displaying its plumage. At 38, he wore his wealth like armor, a $15,000 suit, Italian leather shoes that cost more than Rebecca's monthly rent, and a watch that could feed a family for a year. His father had built the import empire. Daniel had merely inherited it, along with the arrogance that comes from never having to prove yourself. In his manicured hands, he held a stack of documents, waving them with theatrical disdain. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice dripping with mock frustration, "this is what incompetence looks like. Our Hungarian partners have sent us documents, apparently important ones, and not a single person in this pathetic excuse for an international company can tell me what they say." Laughter rippled through the room, the nervous kind that employees produce when their boss makes a joke, regardless of whether it's funny. Daniel's eyes scanned the crowd, feeding off their attention like a vampire feeds on blood. Then, for just a moment, his gaze landed on Rebecca. His lip curled slightly, a micro-expression of disgust so quick most people missed it. But Rebecca didn't miss it. She never missed those looks anymore. "You know what?" Daniel continued, warming to his performance. "I'm feeling generous today. $85,000. My monthly salary, to anyone in this room who can translate these papers. Right here, right now, in front of everyone." The room exploded with nervous energy. Junior executives pulled out their phones, typing frantically into translation apps. The head of operations, a man named Marcus, who wore his incompetence like a badge of honor, stood up and squinted at the documents, pretending he recognized something. "Is that Russian?" someone called out. "No, you idiot, it's obviously Czech," another voice countered. Daniel laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Come on, people. This is an international import company. Surely someone here has more than 2 brain cells to rub together." Rebecca felt something stirring in her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't quite anger, though anger was part of it. It was more like a door that had been locked for so long suddenly rattling against its hinges, testing whether the lock would hold. She knew what those documents said, every word, every legal clause, every comma and semicolon. Because once upon a time, before she became invisible, before she became the cleaning lady, Rebecca Miller had been Professor Miller, a specialist in Eastern European languages with a PhD from Northwestern University and papers published in 3 languages. She had stood in lecture halls teaching students about the intricate beauty of Hungarian grammar, the poetic structure of Polish literature, the historical evolution of Czech linguistics. That was before she had exposed an academic corruption scheme at her university, professors accepting bribes for grades, falsifying research data, exploiting graduate students. She had reported it to the administration, believing naively that truth and justice would prevail. Instead, she had been systematically destroyed. The corrupt professors had connections to donors, to board members, to politicians. Rebecca had been labeled a troublemaker, a liar seeking attention. Within 6 months, she was fired. Within a year, she was blacklisted from every academic institution in the Midwest. Within 2 years, she was cleaning offices to pay rent on a studio apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots were the evening soundtrack. Now, standing in the back of this conference room, watching Daniel Johnson mock and humiliate his own employees, Rebecca faced a choice that would define what remained of her life. She could stay silent, stay invisible, stay safe. Or she could step forward and reclaim the person she used to be, even if just for a moment. Her hands released the cleaning cart handle. Her feet began to move. Daniel was still performing, holding the documents above his head like a trophy. "Come on, $85,000. That's more money than most of you make in a year. Who wants to be a hero?" Rebecca's voice cut through the noise like a knife through butter. "I can translate them." The room didn't just go quiet. It went silent in a way that felt almost supernatural. as if someone had pressed a cosmic mute button. Every head turned. Every eye found her. Daniel's face went through a series of expressions so quickly they almost blurred together. Confusion, disbelief, and then something darker. A contempt so pure it was almost admirable in its honesty. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Did the cleaning lady just speak?" More laughter, but uncertain this time. Some employees looked uncomfortable. Others leaned forward, sensing drama. Rebecca walked toward the front of the room, her sensible work shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. Every step felt like moving through water, but she didn't stop. "Those documents," she said quietly, "are written in Hungarian. They're legal papers regarding an international inheritance. And yes, I can translate them. Every word." Daniel stared at her as if she'd just claimed to be the Queen of England. Then he did something Rebecca hadn't expected. He smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the smile of a predator who's just spotted wounded prey. "This," he said, turning to address the room, "is going to be entertaining. Please, by all means, enlighten us with your vast knowledge of—" "What did you say?" "Hungarian?" He thrust the documents toward her with such force that several pages fluttered to the ground. Rebecca bent down, picked them up carefully, and began to read. What happened next would become the stuff of office legend, the story employees would tell for years to come, the moment that proved that power and worth are not the same thing. But to understand why that moment mattered so much, you have to understand how Rebecca Miller ended up pushing a cleaning cart in the first place. You have to go back to the beginning, to the woman she was before she became invisible. You have to understand what she had lost and what she was about to reclaim. 3 years earlier, Rebecca Miller had stood in front of a lecture hall at Northwestern University, her voice filling the space with the kind of passion that only comes from truly loving what you do. Hungarian, she had told her students, is a linguistic miracle. It's a Uralic language, completely unrelated to the Indo-European family that dominates Europe. Learning it is like learning to see the world through an entirely different lens. She had been 39 then, and her life had felt like it was finally coalescing into something meaningful. Her research on medieval Hungarian literature had been published in prestigious journals. Her classes were always full. Students would wait in line during office hours just to discuss linguistics with her. Her apartment near campus had been small, but filled with books in a dozen languages, artwork she'd collected from travels across Eastern Europe, and photographs of happier times. Her late husband, Thomas, who had died of cancer 5 years before. She had carried that grief with her like a stone in her pocket, but the weight had been manageable, softened by the comfort of work she loved. Everything had changed on a Tuesday in October. One of her graduate students, a young woman named Maria from Budapest, had come to her office in tears. Maria had been brilliant. Her thesis on 19th century Hungarian poetry was groundbreaking, but she was failing her required statistics course despite clearly understanding the material. "Professor Hendricks," Maria had sobbed. "He said he would pass me if I... She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Rebecca had seen the bruises on Maria's wrists where someone had grabbed her too hard. Rebecca had taken Maria to the Title IX office immediately. They had filed a formal complaint. Rebecca had assumed, with the naivety of someone who still believed in institutional justice, that the university would investigate and take appropriate action. Instead, she had walked into a hornet's nest. Professor Richard Hendricks wasn't just any professor. He was the brother-in-law of the university's largest donor, a man whose family name adorned 3 buildings on campus. He was also part of a network of faculty members who had been operating a systematic corruption scheme for years, accepting bribes from wealthy international students, falsifying research data to secure grants, exploiting graduate students for personal research, while giving them nothing in return. When Rebecca started asking questions, when she began connecting dots that others had deliberately left disconnected, she became a target. The retaliation had been swift and brutal. Anonymous complaints about her teaching appeared in her file, claims that she was biased against male students, that she was mentally unstable, that her research was sloppy and plagiarized. Her classes were reassigned. Her research funding was mysteriously reallocated. Colleagues she had considered friends began avoiding her in hallways, crossing to the other side to avoid even making eye contact. The university's lawyers had been particularly efficient. They had built a paper trail that made Rebecca look like an unstable troublemaker with a vendetta. When she tried to fight back, they had offered her a choice: resign quietly with a modest severance package, or be fired publicly with her reputation destroyed so thoroughly that she would never work in academia again. She had chosen to fight. It was the most expensive mistake of her life. The legal battle had drained her savings, destroyed her health, and consumed every ounce of energy she possessed. In the end, she had lost everything: her job, her reputation, her career, and worst of all, her belief that truth and justice actually mattered in the real world. By the time she walked out of that final meeting with the university's lawyers, Rebecca Miller, the professor, had ceased to exist. In her place was just Rebecca Miller, unemployed, blacklisted, and 40 years old with no idea how to do anything except teach languages that no one wanted to learn anymore. The descent had been rapid and brutal. She had applied for teaching positions at community colleges, high schools, even private tutoring services. Every single one had called Northwestern for references. Every single one had received the same message. Rebecca Miller was a problematic employee with mental health issues and questionable professional ethics. Her savings had evaporated paying legal fees. Her modest retirement account had been liquidated to pay rent. She had sold most of her books, her artwork, even her late husband's wedding ring, the one piece of him she had sworn to keep forever. When she had finally taken the job as a janitor at Johnson Import Solutions, it had been an act of pure desperation. The application hadn't required references. The interview had consisted of a 20-minute conversation with a bored HR representative who barely looked up from her phone. Rebecca had been hired on the spot, starting the next day. That was 2 years ago. 2 years of pushing cleaning carts. 2 years of being invisible. 2 years of watching people who knew a fraction of what she knew treat her like she was less than human. The Johnson Import Solutions building was a monument to modern corporate excess. 37 floors of glass and steel in downtown Chicago, designed by an architect whose name appeared in design magazines, but whose buildings all looked exactly the same. Rebecca's domain was floors 15 through 19, approximately 80,000 square feet of office space that she cleaned every Monday through Friday from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. She had a checklist: empty trash cans, vacuum carpets, wipe down desks, clean bathrooms, refill paper towels and toilet paper, spot clean windows, and make sure the coffee stations were stocked for the next morning. It was mechanical work, the kind that allowed her mind to wander while her body went through the motions. She had developed a rhythm over 2 years, a choreography of emptying and wiping and organizing. She could clean an entire floor in 90 minutes if she didn't stop to rest. Most nights she worked alone. The building's other maintenance workers were men, older and quieter, who spoke primarily in Spanish and kept to themselves. They nodded to her in the maintenance room where they all clocked in, but there was no real conversation. They had their own struggles, their own invisibility to maintain. Rebecca had learned the patterns of the building's occupants through their trash and the state of their desks. She knew who ate lunch at their desk every day: Marcus from operations, always Chinese food. She knew who was having an affair: Jennifer from accounting, based on the romantic notes she carelessly left visible. She knew who was looking for a new job: at least a dozen people, based on the resume drafts in their trash cans. She knew who worked late and who came in early and who pretended to be busy, but actually spent most of their time shopping online. She knew all of this, and none of them knew anything about her. The invisibility had been difficult at first. Rebecca had spent her entire adult life being seen as a professor, as an expert, as someone whose opinions mattered. The adjustment to being functionally invisible had felt like dying slowly, one small death at a time. But eventually, she had discovered something unexpected. There was a strange freedom in being invisible. No one expected anything from her except clean floors and empty trash cans. No one asked her opinion about anything. No one required her to perform or impress or prove her worth. She could simply exist, moving through the building like a ghost, observing but not participating. The loneliness, though, that never got easier. Rebecca lived in a studio apartment in a neighborhood called Austin, on Chicago's west side. It wasn't the worst neighborhood in the city, but it wasn't good. Her building was a 3-story walk-up with broken security doors and graffiti on the walls. Her apartment was 400 square feet, A single room with a kitchenette in one corner, a bathroom so small she could barely turn around, and a Murphy bed that she pulled down from the wall each night. The rent was $950 a month, which consumed most of her paycheck. After utilities, phone service, and food, she had about $150 left over each month. She put $50 into savings, a pathetic emergency fund that currently held about $800. The other $100 went to things like toilet paper, laundry, the occasional new pair of work shoes when the old ones wore through. She hadn't bought new clothes in 18 months. She hadn't gone to a movie in 2 years. She hadn't been to a restaurant, a real restaurant, not a fast food place, in so long that she couldn't actually remember the last time. Her entertainment consisted of books from the library and free streaming services. She read voraciously, mostly in Hungarian and Polish, languages that still felt like coming home after a long journey. She had a small radio that picked up a Polish language station, and sometimes she would listen to it while eating dinner, just to hear familiar sounds. She had no friends. Her academic colleagues had all abandoned her during the legal battle. Her family, a sister in Oregon whom she hadn't spoken to in 5 years, had made it clear that they considered Rebecca's downfall to be self-inflicted, the result of not knowing when to keep her mouth shut. Most nights, after her shift ended at 2 a.m., Rebecca would take the train home through a Chicago that felt alien and threatening. The late-night passengers were a mix of night shift workers like herself, drunk people heading home from bars, and occasionally someone who looked like they might be dangerous. She had learned to keep her head down, her hand on the pepper spray in her pocket, and her eyes focused on nothing in particular. She would arrive home around 3 a.m., exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. It was the exhaustion of the soul, a weariness that came from spending 8 hours being treated as if you don't exist. She would heat up whatever cheap meal she'd prepared in bulk earlier in the week, usually rice and beans, sometimes pasta with jarred sauce. She would eat standing up at the counter because sitting felt like too much effort. Then she would pull down the Murphy bed, set her alarm for noon, and fall into a sleep that felt more like unconsciousness than rest. This was her life. This was what her principles had cost her. This was the price of telling the truth in a world that preferred convenient lies. But Rebecca carried within her something that couldn't be taken away, something that survived poverty and humiliation and the systematic destruction of everything she had built. She carried her knowledge, all those years of study, all those languages learned, all those texts read and analyzed and discussed. They could take her job and her reputation and her financial security, but they couldn't reach inside her head and remove the things she knew. That remained hers, hidden beneath the uniform of a janitor, waiting. Daniel Johnson had never questioned whether he deserved the life he lived. It was simply his birthright, as natural and unquestionable as breathing. He had grown up in a mansion in Lake Forest, one of Chicago's wealthiest suburbs. His childhood had been a parade of private schools, family vacations to European capitals, and the casual assumption that the world existed to serve him. His father, Gerald Johnson, had built Johnson Import Solutions from a small shipping business into a multinational corporation with offices in 12 countries. Daniel's education had been expensive, but not particularly rigorous. He had attended an elite private high school where his father was a major donor, then Brown University, where his admission had more to do with his family's wealth than his academic achievement. He had graduated with a degree in business, mostly B's and C's, with an occasional A in classes where the professor had been reminded who his father was. After graduation, he had been installed as Vice President of Strategic Development at his father's company, a title that meant he attended some meetings and signed some papers, but mostly spent his time at expensive lunches and golf outings with clients who humored him because they wanted to stay in Gerald Johnson's good graces. When Gerald had died suddenly of a heart attack 3 years ago, Daniel had inherited everything: the company, the mansion, the investment portfolio worth approximately $180 million. He had been 35 years old, and he had never faced a real challenge in his entire life. Running the company had been easier than expected, mostly because the senior staff who had worked for his father knew what they were doing and simply needed Daniel to stay out of the way. He signed what they told him to sign, appeared at the meetings where his presence was required, and generally played the role of CEO without actually doing much of the actual work. What Daniel lacked in business acumen, he made up for in arrogance. He had internalized the message he'd received his entire life, that he was special, that he was superior, that other people existed primarily to serve his needs. He was particularly contemptuous of the staff he considered beneath him, the administrative assistants, the maintenance workers, the support staff who made the building function. To Daniel, they were like furniture, necessary but not worth noticing or remembering. Rebecca Miller was the perfect example. He had literally never bothered to learn her name. She was just the cleaning lady, a figure he occasionally noticed pushing a cart through the hallways, but never thought about as an actual human being with thoughts, feelings, or a history. If someone had asked him to describe her, he would have struggled. Middle-aged, short hair, wore some kind of uniform. Beyond that, she was just a blur, as forgettable as the carpets she vacuumed. This wasn't personal cruelty on Daniel's part. He would have been confused if someone suggested he was being cruel. In his worldview, cruelty required intention, and he had no intentions toward Rebecca at all. She simply didn't exist in any meaningful way. The documents from Hungary had arrived that morning via express courier. They were part of a complicated international inheritance related to his late grandmother, who had been born in Budapest and had maintained property there until her death. Daniel's Hungarian partners had handled most of the details, but they needed certain papers signed and verified, and they had sent everything overnight. The problem was that all the documents were in Hungarian, and Daniel had never bothered to hire anyone who spoke the language. His usual translator, a woman named Patricia, was on medical leave after surgery. The translation service he called wanted 3 business days and charged premium rates for legal documents. Daniel had been genuinely frustrated. The documents were time-sensitive, something about a legal deadline, but he couldn't read a word of them. His frustration had morphed into the impromptu staff meeting, partly because he actually needed help, but mostly because he enjoyed having an audience. The $85,000 offer had been a joke, a way to mock his employees' incompetence while demonstrating his own wealth and generosity. He had no intention of actually paying anyone that much money for a translation. So when Rebecca Miller, the forgettable cleaning lady, stepped forward and claimed she could translate Hungarian, Daniel's first reaction had been amusement. This was going to be entertaining, watching her embarrass herself in front of everyone, confirming his belief that people like her were fundamentally inferior to people like him. He handed her the documents with theatrical flourish, already composing the joke he would make after she inevitably failed. He had no idea that he was about to experience the most humiliating moment of his privileged life. Rebecca held the documents in her hands, feeling the weight of them. Not just the physical weight of paper, but the weight of everything this moment represented. The conference room was absolutely silent. 87 people watching her, most expecting her to fail, some hoping she would. A few perhaps silently rooting for the underdog. Daniel stood with his arms crossed, that contemptuous smile still playing at the corners of his mouth. He was so certain of her failure that he hadn't even bothered to sit down. Rebecca took a breath and began to read. Ez az okirati gazolja. She started, her pronunciation perfect, the words flowing like water. This document certifies. The change in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous and electric. Heads snapped up. People leaned forward. Daniel's smile froze on his face. Rebecca continued, translating with the fluency of someone who didn't just speak Hungarian, but thought in it, understood its grammar and structure and nuance at a level that came from years of deep study. This document certifies that Daniel Michael Johnson, grandson of Catalin Kovacs Johnson, deceased, is the sole remaining heir to the estate located at Andrassy Avenue No. 47, Budapest, Hungary. The property, consisting of a 6-story historical building constructed in 1893, has been held in trust since 1949, under the protection of the Hungarian government following the nationalization period. She paused, scanning ahead to make sure she understood the next section correctly. The property was returned to family ownership in 2004, following Hungary's accession to the European Union and the resolution of historical property claims. The current appraised value of the property is 15 million euros, approximately 17 million United States dollars. To claim this inheritance, the documented heir must provide verified identification and proof of lineage to the Hungarian Ministry of Justice within 90 days of notification. This document constitutes official notification. The 90-day period begins. Rebecca checked the date at the top of the first page. 83 days ago. You have 7 days remaining to complete the claim process, or the property will revert to the Hungarian state. The silence that followed was profound. It was the silence of people collectively realizing that their entire understanding of reality had just been fundamentally challenged. Daniel Johnson, millionaire, CEO, Prince of Privilege, stood frozen. His face had gone through several colors, red to white to a kind of grayish pale that suggested he might vomit. Rebecca carefully set the documents on the conference table. The subsequent pages, she continued, her voice calm and professional, outline the specific legal requirements for claiming the inheritance. You'll need to provide a certified copy of your birth certificate, your grandmother's death certificate, proof of your father's lineage, and several other documents. You'll also need to travel to Budapest within the 7-day window to sign papers in person at the Ministry of Justice. If you miss the deadline, you forfeit 15 million euros. She looked at Daniel directly for the first time. The documents also specify that failure to respond to this notification will be considered a voluntary relinquishment of all claims. You have 1 week, Mr. Johnson. The room remained silent. Rebecca could see the calculations happening behind people's eyes. The realization that the cleaning lady they had all ignored, the woman who emptied their trash and cleaned their toilets, had just proven herself more valuable than anyone in the entire company. Daniel's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish drowning in air. Finally, Marcus from operations, bless him for his social awkwardness, broke the silence. "Holy shit," he said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "You speak Hungarian?" Rebecca allowed herself a small smile. "Hungarian, Polish, Czech, Slovak, Romanian, and German," she said. "I also read Latin and ancient Greek, though those don't come up much in import documentation." She turned to walk back to her cleaning cart, but Daniel's voice stopped her. "Wait." It wasn't loud, but it carried authority, or at least the attempt at authority. Rebecca turned back. Daniel had recovered some of his composure, though his face was still pale. His brain, she could see, was working overtime trying to reconcile what had just happened with his understanding of how the world worked. "You?" he started, then stopped. Why are you working as a janitor if you can do that?" It was the first time in 2 years that anyone in this building had asked her a direct question about herself. The first time anyone had shown the slightest curiosity about who she was beyond her function. Rebecca could have told him the truth. She could have explained about Northwestern, about the corruption she had exposed, about the systematic destruction of her career. She could have used this moment to make him understand that people's circumstances don't reflect their worth, that tragedy and injustice could happen to anyone, that the woman cleaning his floors might have depth and history and value beyond what he could see. But looking at his face, at the confusion and discomfort written there, she realized he wasn't actually asking out of genuine interest. He was asking because he needed to restore order to his worldview, to find some explanation that would let him continue seeing her as fundamentally inferior. So instead, she said simply, "Life is complicated, Mr. Johnson, and the world isn't always fair to those who tell the truth." She gestured to the documents. "You should probably call your Hungarian partners immediately. 7 days isn't a lot of time to arrange international travel and gather legal documents. I'd recommend starting with a call to the Hungarian consulate in Chicago. They can expedite some of the authentication processes." Then she walked back to her cleaning cart, gripped the handle, and pushed it toward the door. "Wait." Daniel's voice again, more desperate this time. "The money. The 85,000. I said I'd pay whoever could translate it." Rebecca stopped but didn't turn around. "You made that offer to mock people, Mr. Johnson. Not because you actually intended to pay anyone. I didn't do this for money. I did it because I could, and because letting you lose 15 million euros out of ignorance seemed like a waste." She paused, then added, "Though I imagine you could afford a raise for your maintenance staff. We haven't had one in 3 years and we're all making $11 an hour. Something to consider." Then she pushed her cart out of the conference room, leaving behind a crowd of people who would spend the rest of the day trying to process what they had just witnessed. The story spread through the building like wildfire in drought-stricken brush. Within an hour, every employee had heard some version of what had happened. By the end of the day, the story had grown to mythological proportions. Some versions had Rebecca speaking 17 languages. Others had Daniel offering her $100,000. Still others had her turning down a job offer to continue cleaning floors out of pure spite. Rebecca, for her part, went back to work. She finished cleaning the 15th floor, then moved on to the 16th. She emptied trash cans and vacuumed carpets and wiped down desks, just like she did every other day. But something had shifted. The people working late, and there were more of them than usual, everyone finding excuses to stay and catch a glimpse of her, looked at her differently now. Some smiled nervously when she entered their offices. Others looked embarrassed, suddenly aware that they had ignored her existence for 2 years. A few tried to talk to her. Jennifer from accounting, whose affair Rebecca knew about from careless notes, stopped her in the hallway. "That was... wow," Jennifer said, her voice uncertain. "I had no idea you were so... educated." Rebecca gave her a polite smile. "Most people don't ask. Have you always worked in... maintenance?" "No," Rebecca said simply, offering nothing more. Jennifer waited for elaboration that didn't come, then nodded awkwardly and walked away. Marcus from operations was more direct. He cornered her by the elevators. "Listen," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I think what you did was incredible. Standing up to Johnson like that. He's a jackass, everyone knows it. Someone needed to knock him down a peg." "I wasn't trying to knock anyone down," Rebecca said. "I was just translating documents." "Still," Marcus insisted, "it was brave, and I wanted to say that I'm sorry for never, seeing you. Really seeing you." Rebecca appreciated the sentiment, even if it came too late to matter much. "Thank you," she said. "That's kind of you to say." But the most significant interaction came from an unexpected source. At around 9 p.m., as Rebecca was cleaning the 19th floor executive offices, she found Daniel Johnson still at his desk. His office was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, mahogany furniture that probably cost more than Rebecca's car, artwork on the walls that looked original rather than prints. He was on the phone, speaking rapid English with a Hungarian accent on the other end. When he saw Rebecca, he held up one finger. "Wait," and continued his conversation. Rebecca considered leaving, but something made her stay. She began emptying the trash cans in his office, moving quietly but not leaving. Daniel finally hung up and turned to face her. He looked exhausted, his earlier arrogance replaced by something more complex. Confusion, perhaps, or maybe the beginning of actual thought. "I called the consulate," he said. "They confirmed everything you said. I'm flying to Budapest tomorrow morning. My lawyers are scrambling to get all the documents together." Rebecca nodded. "That's good. 7 days doesn't leave much room for error. I asked them," Daniel continued, "about hiring a translator to accompany me, someone who speaks Hungarian fluently. They gave me some names, but..." He trailed off, then looked at her directly. "Would you be willing to go? I'd pay you, obviously. Well, your normal rate plus expenses, and maybe a bonus when we get back." Rebecca had imagined many scenarios for how this day might end, but this wasn't one of them. "Mr. Johnson," she said carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but I don't have a passport. Mine expired 3 years ago, and I haven't been able to afford to renew it." "I can handle that," Daniel said quickly. "Emergency passports can be issued in 24 hours if you know the right people." "And I do." Rebecca studied him, trying to understand what was happening. Was this a genuine offer or some kind of elaborate humiliation? "Why?" she asked. "You could hire any of those translators the consulate recommended. People who specialize in legal translation, who have experience with international inheritance cases." Daniel was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming on his desk, a nervous gesture that seemed out of character for someone usually so composed. "Because," he said finally, "you already know the documents. You understand what's required. And because..." He stopped, struggling with something. "Because I think maybe I've been wrong about a lot of things, and I'd like a chance to not be wrong." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even really an acknowledgement of how he had treated her. But it was something. A crack in the armor of his arrogance. A hint that maybe, possibly, he was capable of learning. Rebecca thought about her studio apartment, about the $950 rent that consumed most of her paycheck, about the $800 in her emergency fund. She thought about Budapest, a city she had visited twice during her academic career and had fallen in love with. Its architecture, its history, its complicated, beautiful language. She thought about what it might feel like to walk through that city again. Not as Professor Miller, but as Rebecca Miller, janitor, who happened to know Hungarian. "I would need my normal hourly rate for the entire trip," she said, "plus economy airfare, accommodation, and meals. And I would need a written contract specifying the terms before we leave." Daniel nodded quickly. "Done. Absolutely. My assistant will draft something tonight. And," Rebecca continued, "when we return, I want you to agree to raise the wages for all maintenance staff to $15 an hour. That's barely a living wage, but it's better than what we're making now." Daniel hesitated, and Rebecca could see him calculating the cost of raising wages versus the 15 million euros he was about to inherit. "Fine," he said. "Agreed." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Then yes, Mr. Johnson, I'll go to Budapest with you." The emergency passport arrived 36 hours later, expedited through channels that Rebecca didn't have access to, but Daniel apparently did. She picked it up from the passport agency office, holding the small blue book in her hands like it was something precious and fragile. She hadn't left the country since her academic career had ended. The passport represented possibility, the chance to be something other than what she had become. The trip was planned with remarkable speed. Daniel's assistant, an efficient woman named Caroline, who had always been polite to Rebecca, emailed her a detailed itinerary. They would fly out Friday evening on a direct flight to Budapest, spend Saturday handling the legal paperwork, and return Sunday evening. 3 days total. Rebecca was given an advance of $500 for any incidental expenses. It was more money than she had seen in a single payment since she'd lost her academic job. She used some of it to buy a small suitcase. Her old one had fallen apart years ago, and a few basic toiletries. Caroline had also included a note. "Mr. Johnson has arranged business class tickets for both of you. Please arrive at O'Hare International 3 hours before the flight for security screening. Business class." Rebecca tried to remember the last time she had flown anywhere at all, let alone in business class. It had been with Thomas, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, to a linguistics conference in Berlin. They had flown economy, sleeping awkwardly with their heads on each other's shoulders, and had been happy. The memory ached, but it was a familiar ache now. Thomas had been gone for 8 years. Sometimes Rebecca wondered if he would even recognize the woman she had become. Not physically, but essentially. Would he be proud that she had exposed the corruption? Would he be disappointed that she hadn't fought harder? Would he understand why she had chosen survival over principle? She would never know. The dead kept their opinions to themselves. Friday evening arrived with the surreal quality of a dream. Rebecca finished her shift at the usual time, went home to her studio apartment, showered, and changed into the one decent outfit she still owned. Black pants and a gray blouse that had seen better days but were still presentable. She took the train to O'Hare, her small suitcase rolling behind her, feeling like an imposter. The airport was crowded with travelers, families heading on vacation, business people checking their phones constantly, couples holding hands and laughing about something private. Rebecca found Daniel waiting at the security checkpoint, and she barely recognized him. Gone was the arrogant peacock in the $15,000 suit. He wore jeans, a simple button-down shirt, and running shoes. He looked younger, more vulnerable, almost human. "You made it," he said, and there was genuine relief in his voice, as if he had been worried she might not show up. "Of course," Rebecca replied. "We have a contract." They moved through security, Rebecca removing her shoes and placing her small bag on the conveyor belt, feeling the familiar anxiety that airports always triggered, wondering if somehow they would find a reason to stop her, to tell her she didn't belong. But they passed through without incident, and soon they were walking through the terminal toward their gate. "I've never been to Budapest," Daniel said, making conversation. "My grandmother died when I was 12. I barely remember her." "It's a beautiful city," Rebecca said. "The architecture is stunning. The Danube splits the city into Buda and Pest. One side hills and castles, the other side flat and commercial. It's like 2 cities in one." "You've been there before?" Daniel asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. "Twice," Rebecca said. "For academic conferences years ago. I stayed in a small hotel in the Jewish quarter. There was a cafe on the corner that made the best chimney cake I've ever tasted." "What's chimney cake?" "Kurtoskalax," Rebecca said, pronouncing it perfectly. It's a traditional Hungarian pastry, rolled dough cooked over an open fire, coated in cinnamon sugar. It's sold by street vendors. Tourists love it, but locals love it too, which is how you know it's good. Daniel smiled, a real smile this time, not the predatory smirk she was used to seeing. We should find some while we're there. If we have time, Rebecca said. The legal paperwork is going to be complicated. International inheritance claims always are. They reached their gate and settled into seats to wait for boarding. Daniel pulled out his phone and began responding to emails. Rebecca watched the other travelers, observing the small dramas playing out around them. A mother trying to calm a crying toddler, a young couple arguing in hushed voices, an elderly man sleeping with his mouth open. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel's voice interrupted her observations. Rebecca turned to him. "Of course. Earlier, when you translated the documents, you said something about the world not being fair to people who tell the truth. What did you mean?" Rebecca considered how much to reveal. She had spent 2 years being invisible, and invisibility had become a kind of protection. Sharing her story felt dangerous, like opening a door she had carefully locked. But something about this moment, sitting in an airport about to board a flight to Budapest with a man who had treated her as less than human just days ago, felt like maybe it was time to open that door. Just a crack. "I used to be a university professor," she said. "I taught linguistics at Northwestern, Eastern European languages primarily. I had a career, publications, respect. I was good at what I did." Daniel had stopped looking at his phone. He was listening with complete attention. "One of my graduate students came to me because a professor was sexually harassing her and offering to trade grades for favors. I helped her report it. And when I started asking questions, I discovered it wasn't just one professor. It was a whole network of corruption, bribery, falsified research, exploitation of students." "What happened?" Daniel asked quietly. "I reported it to the administration. I believed naively that they would investigate and take action. Instead, they destroyed me. The corrupt professors had connections to donors and board members. I was labeled a troublemaker, a liar. Within 6 months, I was fired. Within a year, I was blacklisted from every academic institution in the region. Within 2 years, I was cleaning offices because it was the only job I could get that didn't require references." Daniel was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something Rebecca hadn't heard before. "Shame." "I'm sorry," he said. That's horrific." "It's reality," Rebecca said. "For a lot of people. The world rewards those who protect power, not those who challenge it." "But you still did it," Daniel said. "You still reported them, even knowing it might cost you everything." "I did," Rebecca agreed. "Though sometimes I wonder if that was brave or just stupid." "It was brave," Daniel said firmly. "And what they did to you was wrong." Rebecca looked at him, this man who had been casually cruel to her just days ago, and saw something shifting behind his eyes. Not a complete transformation, that would take much longer, but the beginning of awareness. "Thank you," she said, "for saying that." The boarding announcement interrupted them. They joined the line of passengers, and soon they were settling into their business class seats. Wide leather chairs that reclined into beds. More personal space than Rebecca had experienced in years. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Rebecca looked out the window at Chicago's lights spreading below them like a galaxy. Somewhere down there was her studio apartment, her cleaning cart, her life of invisibility. But up here, 30,000 feet in the air, heading toward a city she had loved and lost, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. They landed at Budapest Ferenc Liszt International Airport on Saturday morning, stepping off the plane into a world Rebecca had thought she would never see again. The airport was smaller than O'Hare but more elegant, with soaring ceilings and Art Nouveau touches that hinted at the city's architectural treasures. Daniel had arranged for a driver, a Hungarian man named Laszlo, who spoke English with a thick accent and drove them into the city in a sleek black sedan. Rebecca sat in the back seat, watching the city unfold outside the window like a memory coming back to life. Budapest was as beautiful as she remembered. The Danube glittered in the morning sun, its waters dividing the city into 2 distinct halves. On the Buda side, the royal palace sat atop Castle Hill, its dome dominating the skyline. On the Pest side, the parliament building stretched along the riverbank, its Gothic spires reaching toward the sky like prayers made of stone. They crossed the chain bridge, and Rebecca felt tears pricking at her eyes. She had crossed this bridge before, with Thomas, on a warm summer evening after a conference dinner. They had stopped in the middle, leaning against the railing, watching the lights reflect off the water while he held her hand and told her that Budapest was the most romantic city in Europe. "You miss it," Daniel said, noticing her expression. "Yes," Rebecca said simply. "I miss a lot of things." Laszlo drove them to a hotel in the 5th district near the Basilica. Daniel had booked 2 rooms, small but elegant, with high ceilings and windows overlooking the street. Rebecca's room had a tiny bathroom with a clawfoot tub, a bed that was actually comfortable, and a writing desk with stationery embossed with the hotel's logo. She stood at the window for a long moment, just breathing, just being present in a place that felt like it belonged to the person she used to be. The Hungarian Ministry of Justice was housed in an imposing building near Kossuth Square, all columns and carved stone and the weight of bureaucracy. They arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, as their appointment specified. The official who met them was a woman in her 50s named Dr. Szabo. She spoke perfect English with a slight British accent, the result of years of international legal work. She reviewed their documents with meticulous care: Daniel's birth certificate, his father's death certificate, his grandmother's documentation, proof of lineage stretching back 3 generations. "Everything appears to be in order," Dr. Szabo said finally. "However, there is one complication." Daniel's face went pale. "What complication?" Dr. Szabo pulled out another set of documents. "The property at Andrassy Avenue has a sitting tenant, an elderly woman named Mrs. Nemeth, who has lived there since 1967. Under Hungarian law, she has protected tenant rights that cannot be easily dissolved. Any sale or transfer of the property must account for her right to remain in residence until her death." She looked at Daniel directly. "This significantly reduces the property's market value. Most investors are not interested in buildings with protected tenants. You would need to either wait for Mrs. Nemeth to pass away, which could be many years, or sell at a substantial discount." Daniel looked stricken. Rebecca could see him calculating. 15 million euros suddenly becoming 8 million, maybe less. "Can we meet her?" Rebecca asked. "Mrs. Nemeth, can we visit the property?" Dr. Szabo looked surprised. "It's not required for the legal transfer, but yes, it can be arranged. Why do you ask?" "Because she's a person," Rebecca said. "Not just a complication. If Mr. Johnson is inheriting property where someone lives, he should at least meet her." Dr. Szabo studied Rebecca with new interest. "You speak Hungarian?" "I do." "Then perhaps you should come along. Mrs. Nemeth speaks no English. She is 94 years old and very set in her ways." Andrassy Avenue was one of Budapest's most elegant streets, lined with neo-Renaissance mansions and upscale shops. Number 47 was a 6-story building with ornate balconies and a facade that showed its age in a way that was beautiful rather than decrepit. Mrs. Nemeth lived on the 3rd floor in an apartment that felt frozen in time. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades, black and white images from the 1950s fading into color photographs from more recent years. The furniture was old but well-maintained, covered with crocheted doilies and antimacassars. Mrs. Nemeth herself was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, with white hair pulled back in a bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She served them tea in delicate china cups painted with flowers and pastries that she had clearly baked that morning. Rebecca translated as they talked. Mrs. Nemeth spoke about the building's history, how she had moved in as a young woman with her husband, an engineer who had died in 1989. She spoke about her daughter, who lived in Vienna and visited twice a year. She spoke about the neighborhood, how it had changed and stayed the same. "I know why you're here," she said finally in Hungarian, looking at Daniel. "You inherit the building. You want me to leave?" Rebecca translated, but Daniel shook his head even before she finished. "No," he said, speaking directly to Mrs. Nemeth even though she couldn't understand him. Tell her that I have no intention of forcing her to leave. This is her home. She should stay as long as she wants." Rebecca translated, and Mrs. Nemeth's eyes filled with tears. "Köszönöm," she said. "Thank you." Then she reached across the table and patted Daniel's hand with her tiny, wrinkled fingers. They stayed for another hour, drinking tea and eating pastries while Mrs. Nemeth showed them photographs and told stories about the building's history. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but he understood the emotion, the deep attachment this woman had to a place that meant everything to her. When they finally left, walking back down the elegant staircase to the street, Daniel was quiet. "I'm going to keep the building," he said suddenly. "Not sell it, just keep it, maintain it. Let her live there. Let the other tenants stay. Maybe renovate it properly, restore it to what it was meant to be." Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "That's not what I expected you to say." "It's not what I expected to say either," Daniel admitted. "But seeing her in there, seeing how much it means to her, I don't know. Selling it for $8 million instead of 15 suddenly doesn't seem like the most important thing." They walked in silence for a while, passing cafes and shops, tourists taking photographs of the beautiful buildings. "There's something else," Daniel said. "When we get back to Chicago, I want to offer you a job, a real job, not cleaning, something that actually uses what you know." Rebecca stopped walking. "What kind of job?" "International liaison," Daniel said. "We work with companies in a dozen countries, and half the time we're struggling with translation issues and cultural misunderstandings. We need someone who actually understands languages and cultures, not just someone who can use Google Translate." "I don't have a reference," Rebecca said. "Northwestern destroyed my reputation. No company will hire me based on my academic credentials." "I don't care," Daniel said. "I've seen what you can do. That's all the reference I need." Rebecca felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite hope, because hope felt too dangerous, but maybe the cousin of hope. Possibility. "I'll think about it," she said. "Good," Daniel replied. "Now, didn't you mention something about chimney cake?" They found a street vendor near the Opera House, an old man with a small cart and a rotating spit over glowing coals. The Kurtoska lax was exactly as Rebecca remembered. Crispy on the outside, soft and sweet on the inside, warm enough to steam in the cool afternoon air. They ate while walking along Andrassy Avenue, not talking much, just existing in the moment. Rebecca felt something loosening inside her, some tight knot of tension that had been there so long she'd forgotten it wasn't supposed to be. The flight back to Chicago felt different from the flight out. Daniel spent most of it working on his laptop, but periodically he would look up and ask Rebecca questions about Hungarian culture, about the building they had inherited, about Mrs. Nemeth's stories. For the first time in 2 years, Rebecca felt like someone was genuinely interested in what she had to say. Not as Professor Miller, whose credentials demanded respect, but as Rebecca, whose knowledge and perspective had value simply because she possessed them. They landed on Sunday evening, and Daniel's driver took them both home. They dropped Rebecca off first, at her building in Austin. Daniel stared at the graffiti-covered walls, the broken security door, the general air of decay. "You live here?" he asked, and there was no judgment in his voice, just genuine surprise. $11 an hour doesn't go far in Chicago, Rebecca said. "Even with the raise to 15, this is about all I'll be able to afford." "The job I mentioned," Daniel said. "International liaison. It would start at $80,000 a year, plus benefits, health insurance, retirement contribution, 3 weeks vacation." Rebecca's hand was on the door handle, ready to exit the car. She froze. $80,000? "It's the standard starting salary for that position level," Daniel said. "Though given your language abilities, you'd probably qualify for the senior level, which starts at 95. But I figured we'd start with 80 and see how it goes." Rebecca did the math in her head. $80,000 a year. She currently made about $23,000. This would more than triple her income. "I need to think about it," she said again. "Of course," Daniel said. "Take your time. The offer stands." Rebecca climbed out of the car and watched it drive away, her mind spinning with possibilities that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Monday morning, Rebecca showed up for her cleaning shift as usual. She clocked in at 6 p.m., grabbed her cart, and headed up to the 15th floor. The building felt different. People who had ignored her for 2 years suddenly wanted to talk to her. Word had spread about the Budapest trip, about Daniel Johnson's inheritance, about the cleaning lady who spoke 6 languages. Some of the attention was genuine. Others felt performative, people trying to align themselves with someone who had suddenly become interesting. Rebecca deflected most of it politely, focusing on her work. Empty trash cans, vacuum carpets, wiped down desks. The rhythm was soothing, familiar. But around 8 p.m., Caroline, Daniel's assistant, found her on the 17th floor. "Mr. Johnson would like to see you in his office," Caroline said, "when you have a moment." Rebecca finished vacuuming the section she was working on, parked her cart, and took the elevator up to the 19th floor. Daniel's office looked the same as it always had: enormous windows, expensive furniture, artwork on the walls. But Daniel himself looked different, less arrogant, more thoughtful. "Come in," he said. "Close the door." Rebecca did, feeling a flutter of nervousness. Had he changed his mind about the job? About the raise for maintenance staff? "I've been thinking," Daniel said, "about what you told me, about what happened at Northwestern, about the corruption you exposed." "Okay," Rebecca said carefully. "I made some calls," Daniel continued, "to lawyers I know, and I wanted to ask your permission to have them look into your case. What the university did to you, the retaliation, the blacklisting, it's probably illegal. Employment law has protections for whistleblowers." Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach. "I can't afford lawyers, Mr. Johnson. I tried to fight it 3 years ago. It bankrupted me." "I know," Daniel said. "That's why I would pay for it. Consider it restitution for the way I treated you, for the way everyone in this building treated you." "Why?" Rebecca asked. "Why would you do that?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because meeting Mrs. Nemeth in Budapest made me realize something. She's lived in that apartment for 57 years. It's not just a place to her, it's her whole life, her history, her identity. And I could have taken that away from her without ever even meeting her, without caring about what it meant." He looked at Rebecca directly. "You're not that different. This building, this job, it's not what you're supposed to be. It's what you were forced into by people who cared more about protecting their power than about what was right. And I've been part of that problem. Maybe not directly, but by not caring, by not seeing people like you as fully human." "And now you see me," Rebecca said. "Now I see you," Daniel agreed. "And I'd like to help if you'll let me." Rebecca thought about Northwestern, about the professors who had destroyed her, about the administrators who had protected them. She thought about the years of anger and grief and powerlessness. "Okay," she said. "You can have your lawyers look into it. But I want to be clear, I don't expect anything to come of it. The university has powerful lawyers and powerful friends." "So do I," Daniel said. "And sometimes power should be used for something other than protecting itself." The next 6 months unfolded like a story Rebecca had once believed in, but had stopped expecting. A story where truth might actually matter, where justice wasn't just a word people used to justify injustice. Daniel's lawyers, working on contingency, filed a wrongful termination suit against Northwestern University. They uncovered a paper trail that the university's own lawyers had been too confident to fully conceal. Emails discussing how to neutralize Rebecca's complaints, documentation of the fabricated accusations against her, evidence of the coordinated campaign to blacklist her from other institutions. The case was strong enough that Northwestern's lawyers recommended settlement rather than going to trial and having everything exposed publicly. The university agreed to pay Rebecca $350,000, expunge her record, and provide a letter of reference acknowledging her years of service and scholarly contributions. It wasn't everything. It didn't erase the years of poverty and humiliation. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was proof that she had been right all along. Meanwhile, Rebecca had accepted Daniel's job offer. She started as international liaison at $80,000 a year, with an office on the 18th floor, not as large as the executive offices, but worlds away from the maintenance room where she used to clock in. Her job was exactly what Daniel had described: facilitating communication with the company's international partners, translating documents, helping navigate cultural differences, occasionally traveling to meet with clients in person. She was good at it. More than good. She was exceptional. Within 3 months, she had identified inefficiencies in their Eastern European partnerships that had been costing the company hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. Within 6 months, she had negotiated new contracts that improved relationships and increased profits. Daniel, to his credit, promoted her to Senior International Liaison with a raise to $95,000. He also followed through on his promise to raise wages for the maintenance staff to $15 an hour, and then, 6 months later, to $18. But the most significant change wasn't financial or professional. It was personal. Rebecca began to rebuild herself. She moved out of the studio apartment in Austin and into a one-bedroom in Andersonville, a neighborhood with tree-lined streets and cafes and a sense of community. It wasn't luxurious, but it was safe and bright and felt like home in a way her old place never had. She started reconnecting with former colleagues, carefully, tentatively, reaching out to people who had abandoned her during the legal battle. Some ignored her messages. Others responded with apologies that felt sincere. A few became friends again, though the relationships would never be quite what they were before. She joined a Hungarian cultural society that met monthly for language practice and cultural events. She took a Polish literature course at a community college, just for the joy of it. She started going to concerts and museums and restaurants, slowly reclaiming pleasures that poverty had made impossible. She even went on a few dates, though nothing serious. The wounds from her marriage to Thomas, combined with the trauma of the past few years, made vulnerability difficult. But she was open to possibility in a way she hadn't been before. And through it all, her relationship with Daniel Johnson evolved into something neither of them had expected. Not quite friendship, but a mutual respect that bordered on it. 1 year after the conference room incident, Daniel called a company-wide meeting. Rebecca, now Senior International Liaison with an office and a title and respect, sat in the front row instead of standing in the back with a cleaning cart. Daniel stood at the podium looking out at the assembled employees. "A year ago," he began, "I stood in a conference room and made a joke about $85,000. I was mocking all of you, really, but I was particularly mocking someone I considered beneath my notice, our janitorial staff, and one person specifically." The room was silent. Everyone remembered that day. "Rebecca Miller proved me wrong in a way that changed my life," Daniel continued. "She showed me that value has nothing to do with job titles or salaries, that knowledge and dignity exist in places we don't expect, and that the people we ignore might be the most extraordinary people in the room." He paused, looking directly at Rebecca. "Because of her, this company has changed. We've raised wages for our support staff. We've improved our international operations. We've become more conscious of how we treat people regardless of their position." He held up a document. "But there's one more thing. A year ago, I jokingly promised $85,000 to anyone who could translate Hungarian documents. Rebecca did it, and she asked for something more valuable than money. Dignity and fair wages for people who needed them." Daniel smiled. "But a promise is a promise. So, Rebecca, in addition to your salary and the promotion you've earned, I'm giving you that $85,000 I promised. Consider it a year late, but with interest." The room erupted in applause. Rebecca felt tears pricking at her eyes, not tears of sadness this time, but of something more complex. Relief, vindication, joy. After the meeting, employees congratulated her. Some of them were the same people who had ignored her for 2 years, but she tried not to hold grudges. People were complicated. They could learn and grow, just like she was learning to trust again. Marcus from operations pulled her aside. "You know what the best part of this whole story is?" he asked. "What?" "You stayed kind. Even when Johnson was humiliating you, even when everyone treated you like you were invisible, you didn't become bitter. You didn't get revenge. You just helped. You translated the documents because it was the right thing to do." "I'm not sure that's true," Rebecca said honestly. "I think part of me wanted to hurt him, to prove that he was wrong about me." "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But you didn't. You helped him. And then you asked for something that would help other people, not just yourself. That's not bitterness. That's grace." That evening, Rebecca took the train home to Andersonville, watching the city slide past her window. Chicago looked different now, not because the city had changed, but because she had. She thought about Mrs. Nemeth in Budapest, still living in her apartment on Andrassy Avenue, which Daniel had renovated beautifully while keeping all the tenants in place. She thought about the maintenance staff who were making $18 an hour instead of $11. She thought about Maria, her former graduate student, who had reached out recently to thank Rebecca for believing her. for fighting even when it cost everything. She thought about the settlement from Northwestern, about the letter of reference that acknowledged her scholarly contributions, about the fact that truth had eventually prevailed even though it had taken years. And she thought about Daniel Johnson, who had transformed from an arrogant millionaire into someone who was trying, imperfectly but genuinely, to be better. The world wasn't fair. Rebecca knew that better than most. Justice was slow and incomplete. Good people suffered, bad people prospered. The systems that were supposed to protect the vulnerable often protected the powerful instead. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, truth mattered. Sometimes courage was rewarded. Sometimes people changed. Sometimes the invisible became visible again. Rebecca got off at her stop and walked the 3 blocks to her apartment building. The streets were quiet, lit by street lamps and the warm glow from apartment windows. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing piano. She could hear the notes drifting through an open window. She climbed the stairs to her 1-bedroom apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. It wasn't much, still modest, still small by most standards, but it was hers. She had earned it, not with luck or connections or inherited wealth, but with knowledge and courage and the refusal to disappear completely. On her desk sat a photograph from Budapest, her and Daniel standing in front of the building on Andrassy Avenue, with Mrs. Nemeth between them, all 3 of them smiling. It was her favorite photograph because it reminded her of what was possible. Not perfection, not complete justice, not a fairy tale ending where everything was magically fixed, but something better, growth, change, the possibility of becoming better than you were yesterday. Rebecca had been invisible for 2 years. She had been humiliated, dismissed, treated as less than human. She had lost everything, her career, her savings, her sense of self-worth. But she had survived, and more than survived. She had reclaimed herself, piece by piece, word by word, language by language. The Hungarian documents had been the key that unlocked the door, but the door had always been there, waiting. She had just needed someone to notice she was capable of opening it. Now, standing in her apartment with the city breathing around her, Rebecca felt something she hadn't felt in years. Gratitude, not for what had been taken from her, but for what she had found in the process of rebuilding. She had discovered that dignity couldn't be taken away by others, only surrendered from within. She had learned that knowledge was power, but so was the courage to use it. She had proven that transformation was possible, not just for her, but for people like Daniel who had seemed irredeemable. Most importantly, she had learned that invisibility was a choice. For 2 years, she had chosen it, protecting herself by disappearing. But when the moment came to step forward, to be seen, to risk vulnerability and rejection, she had made a different choice. She had chosen to be visible, and in doing so, she had changed everything. 3 years later, the conference room looked exactly the same. Same fluorescent lights, same uncomfortable chairs, same view of Chicago through the windows, but everything else was different. Rebecca stood at the front of the room, not as a janitor but as Director of International Operations, presenting the company's expansion plans for Eastern Europe. She spoke confidently, clicking through slides showing market analysis, partnership opportunities, and projected growth. Daniel sat in the front row, listening attentively. He was 41 now, and the arrogance that had once defined him had been replaced by something more substantial, actual competence, earned rather than inherited. In the back row sat 3 new janitors, all of them making $22 an hour, with health insurance and retirement benefits, and the kind of respect that Rebecca had once been denied. One of them, a woman named Patricia, was taking night classes in computer science, funded by the company's education assistance program that Daniel had implemented 2 years ago. After the presentation, employees filed out, many stopping to congratulate Rebecca on the expansion plans. Daniel lingered, waiting until the room was empty. "You know," he said, "I still think about that day, when you translated those documents." "So do I," Rebecca said. "Do you regret it?" Speaking up. "You could have stayed invisible, kept your head down." Rebecca thought about the question seriously. "No," she said finally, "because staying invisible was killing me slowly. At least speaking up gave me a chance to be alive again." "I'm glad you did," Daniel said. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you risked it." Me too, Rebecca said. They walked out of the conference room together, director and CEO, equals in a way that would have been unimaginable 3 years earlier. Outside the windows, Chicago sprawled toward the horizon, millions of people living their lives, struggling with their own invisibility and their own moments of choice. Somewhere in the city, another person was being dismissed, ignored, treated as less than human. Somewhere, another person was deciding whether to stay silent or speak up, whether to remain invisible or risk being seen. Rebecca couldn't help them all. She couldn't fix every injustice or right every wrong, but she could be proof that change was possible, that truth could matter, that the person emptying your trash might know 6 languages, that power and worth were different things, that transformation, real, fundamental transformation, was always within reach for those brave enough to grasp it. She had been the millionaire's janitor, invisible and dismissed. Now she was simply Rebecca Miller, flawed, scarred, stronger than she had ever imagined she could be. And that, she decided, was more than enough.